This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite Tight Foam. Say no to inefficient and drafty. Say yes to Loctite Tight Foam. When pros need to seal gaps too small for insulation but big enough to create a draft, they reach for Loctite's Tight Foam. The high-density foam forms a tenacious bond to most common building materials, stays flexible to prevent cracking, and keeps air, moisture, and pests out of the house. Whether you're adding R value to the rec room or finishing a boring basement, give that space a second chance with Loctite Tight Foam. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information. Hey, podcast listeners, be sure to check out Fine Homebuilding's e-learning opportunities. We've created a special discount coupon just for you. Learn about sustainable home building, using mini-split heat pumps, insulation, finished carpentry, and more. See all of what's available at courses.finehomebuilding.com and then use the special code podcast20 for a discount on any class. That's podcast20 in all caps. Thanks for listening.
Permanent wood foundation specification. I'm pretty sure that there's a formula in Chapter 5, and when you look at the formula, you're going to want to call an engineer because you'll probably be as confused as I am by all of the inputs to that formula.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, a weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Gurton.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Hey, gents, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
I overheard you saying just a little bit ago, Brian, that your PV for the months it's been in operation has actually produced a surplus. Did I get that right?
Yes, not months. It was actually weeks that it had been in operation. So on the first electric bill that I got after we had turned the system on, it included 3 weeks. It was a month cycle. 3 weeks of that month cycle, the PV was turned on for. And in that time, we ended up with a $6 credit on our electric bill. So that after consumption and, our electric provider has some, delivery fees or grid fees or whatever they call them. So that felt really good. And what I was saying to Mike and Jeff while you were away was that, we came online at sort of not an ideal time of year because, we heat the house with a, heat pump, we heat with electricity. So through the winter, we use a lot of energy and we won't produce enough. And obviously production is lower in the winter. So we won't produce enough to have a surplus going through the winter. So I'm really excited to, maybe now the next report will be a year from now when I can tell you what it's been like over the course of a year and how much of a credit we have looking at going into next winter. Hopefully in the summer months, that's what happens, right? We build a big credit that gets us through the winter months. That's the plan anyway.
Quick question. Does the utility allow your PV production to pay for taxes and the weird fees? Can it apply to every part of the bill, or is there always a part that you have to pay?
I had a dollar amount credit on the bill, so I assume it covers everything. It can go towards everything. Yeah. The bills, unfortunately, Eversource's bills they're not that helpful in terms of, that kind of information, but I can say that it covered and actually put us in the plus, a dollar amount in the plus on our bill.
You've been working on an interesting, I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I just got an email from Eversource past couple of days saying that they're redoing their bills and it's going to be a little more granular. So you should be able to pull it apart. Yeah.
You're working on an interesting story, Brian, Larson trusses. And can you first explain what that is and what's interesting about it or what you're learning about it going through this process?
Yeah. So, anyone who has been paying attention to Fine Homebuilding, Green Building Advisor for a little while may have heard the term bon fig wall. That's a term that
anyone who listens to the podcast, I would say.
Anyone listens to the podcast. Yeah, we had an author whose last name was Bonfiglioli, right? Wrote an article on his wall assembly, and it became very quickly affectionately known as the bon fig wall. Well, the Larson truss system is a similar thing. There was a builder in Canada in the 80s named John Larson, who developed a system for hanging trusses on the outside of a framed wall assembly.
Floor trusses, right?
Well, his were site-built trusses. His were 2x2s with plywood gussets connecting the 2x2s, and he did this to, he was in a very cold climate. He did this to create a deep cavity for insulation outboard of the sheathing and the air barrier. So what he did was he stick framed the wall and sheathed it, and then put polyethylene sheeting over the wall on the outside of the wall for an air barrier, and then hung these trusses on the outside of the wall, and I believe he put another layer of sheathing and siding on the trusses. And so, we have this system named after John Larson. And it came to my attention recently that I kind of knew this, but I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to Larson trusses over the years. Oh, one more note. John Larson did try to sell these as a product for a little while. And there was an article, there was actually a product review in Popular Science magazine or Popular Mechanics magazine, and it gave us a source for mailing him for Larson trusses from his shop in Canada. Yeah, but that didn't really fly. But what's happened is that over the years, people have continued to use this system in different ways, and like you noted, Patrick, now a lot of people use either a floor truss or a I-joist for their Larson trusses. But I also recently ran into an architect in Vermont who has a system that he likes that is a site-built. It's simplified, but it's a site-built truss. So there's good reasons to like this system, and we have not covered it since the early 80s. And even then, we covered it in sort of a different kind of way. So I decided it was time to take another look at how Larson trusses are being used today, dive a little bit into the building science, and how they sort of share some attributes with a double stud wall, and they share some attributes with a perfect wall. Joe Stiebrick's idea of having your insulation outboard of your structure. So it's a really interesting system that I look forward to getting in the magazine again.
And it's meant to be affordable. That's one of the big selling points, right? Is it's meant to be less expensive than thick insulation layers and other ways of doing this, right?
It's meant to be affordable, buildable. A lot of people kind of propose it as a remodel option, which it is. Although if you're going to do just like exterior insulation, you have circumstances like your roof overhangs and other things that you'd have to deal with to add, to push your wall assembly out. But the people that I'm talking to are using it on new homes, and we're going to explore the reasons why.
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
Mike, we were talking ahead of the show about so when people imagine what it's like to be a landlord, I think they imagine counting off the C notes into their bank account, right? But oftentimes it's phone calls at bad hours about weird stuff that's going on in people's homes that you're renting. What's going on?
Oh, so I have two rentals still going, and I just got a text message, and usually the text message is, when you have time in the next few days, and then listed out a couple of things. So I went over, and tenant had replaced two light bulbs, seemed to have stopped working in fixtures. So she replaced the light bulbs, and the new light bulbs didn't work. And I went there, and I kind of knew right away what the problem was going to be. I've experienced this before. We've had a wet summer, very humid, and we're within 3 miles of salt water. And what often happens inside the screw-in light bulb, the bottom part that the bulb touches to have the electrical connection, often they're either brass or aluminum, and they get just a little surface corrosion on there. just enough that it breaks that connection between the bulb and the fixture and the, fitting. So I just wiggled the light. I went like this, just turned the light bulb in and out 2 or 3 times, and then say, flip the switch. And she thought I was a magician because, it went on. It was the same bulb. She said, I put a new bulb in, the fixture's broken. I said, yeah, and probably your old bulb was fine.
It was
you
good
have it.
too.
No,
Yeah.
I threw that away. And, because she just presumed that it was broken. And then she had slow water in her bathroom sink, and I knew what that problem was too, because she has long hair, and the little pop-up that closes off the bottom of your sink so you can fill it with water. There's a shaft that comes out perpendicular to the drain, and that's just a big spot for hair to collect. So I pulled a chipmunk size glob of gook and hair out of that. And then while I did that, when I was filling the bowl up to wash everything out, because it was pretty messy, the aerator on the faucet, I noticed it was spraying in all kinds of directions and not a lot of water came out. So I just unscrewed it, and it's one of the older style, not the newer cartridge style. So I could take it apart and with a old toothbrush kind of brush out all of the gunk that it, little bits of debris had collected, and now it runs fine. And it just makes me wonder, for your average homeowner who really, particularly a new homeowner that don't have experience with regular maintenance of a house, what do they do when they screw a light bulb in and it doesn't go on, and they think
they move? They pack up and buy a new house.
Got to sell the house now before somebody, yeah.
Mike, I wanted the same thing, Mike. And, in shop class, I learned how to rewire a lamp as an example, right? And, it's like this stuff people have no exposure to anymore.
Just basic home maintenance things. There's just so many. I think, like you mentioned, Patrick, maybe just somebody searches on YouTube and they find the answers there if they want to tackle it themselves, or they just live with it.
They use another bathroom until that aerator's clogged up, right?
Mike, you told me not long ago that, and I've thought about this a lot over the years, that if you were going into business again, you'd go into some sort of home maintenance business. And, and I just feel like, not only the kinds of tasks that you're describing right now that are just kind of maintenance tasks, and they don't even rise to the level of handyman, right? They're even like, they're just maintenance things. And like with changing filters and, all these different appliances that we have now that need maintenance. Like, I think there's going to be, and I was having a conversation with Kylie about this recently. I think there's going to be a market for people who can, on a regular basis, stop into houses, do what needs to be done, and then also be the person who can be called for something like, hey, I just switched a light bulb and it's not working, or, I got a drain that's not draining, that kind of thing. However, when you mentioned the light bulb, and I thought of that Edison light bulb fixture, I thought of something that I saw on TV recently. I don't have cable TV, so I never see commercials. I was watching some TV with my mom at her place recently, and I saw this advertisement for the socket fan. Have you all seen this? No. So this is you should look it up, and someone should review this. So it is a ceiling fan that you can screw into any Edison style socket.
What could possibly go wrong?
You can pop the bulb out of your recessed can light, and you can screw the socket fan right in, and now you have a ceiling fan and a light coming out of your recessed can light.
That's fantastic. I'm going to put them all over.
How large is it? How large are the fan blades on it?
They're not very big. They're maybe 10 inches, I think. It's quite an interesting, as seen on TV, type of product.
Brilliant.
Something to add to my suggestion that I emailed to Patrick the other day on, maybe I didn't email it, but it was just like, let's do an after show on all the bogus products that are out there that, like the microsphere paint that we talked about in a recent podcast, and some
I'm writing this down again, Mike.
Or just bad ideas like that dryer box that allows you to vent,
that's a bad idea.
keep the heat in the house in the winter.
Yeah, as well as enough humidity to grow a rainforest.
Oh my gosh! So I'm guessing you've been raking leaves, Jeff, on your yard. Am I right?
Well, I haven't gotten to the raking part yet. So I first when they first start to fall, I usually just mulch them with the mower until they're all down, and then start.
Do you have a leaf blower? Is that part of your quiver of fall cleanup tools?
Yeah, I got a couple of leaf blowers. I mean, because like clean the deck off like 3 times a day, it seems like.
Yeah, I'm sure. And do you have cordless gas? What's your leaf blowing power source?
For little stuff like the deck or the driveway, I've got a cordless, and then when it gets serious, I've got a backpack blower.
Nice. Well, I'm looking at mine out there, and it's getting to the point where it needs to be dealt with. I want to remind folks, we're planning some theme shows for the Fine Homebuilding podcast. Matt Amalia of Timber HP, which, as you may know, the wood fiber insulation company that just started up in Maine, is going to be on the show to talk about his business and what the benefits are of wood fiber insulation. We have plans to talk to framers, plumbers, drywallers. If you have questions targeted to a specific trade, if you all could write them in, and we'll tailor the show to the folks' expertise. And I think it would be a great way to improve the quality of the show, which we're always trying to do. So we ask your help in doing that. Right, Mike?
Well, that way people don't have to rely on our supposed knowledge.
Our dubious expertise, right?
When we get a question about, electricity or plumbing, and we're both just scratching our head, we're all just
That's just for fun. Our answers to those questions are just for fun. So if you want to hear someone who knows what they're talking about, I would ask you to send in your questions so we can get the right person on. But it should be fun, in addition. And we also have a question out there for, the worst client, the worst project, the worst specific job on a project, whatever it is, the best day on the job. If you could send in those anecdotes, we would, I think it would make a really fun show to talk about that stuff too, right? That was your idea, Mike, which I think is a good one.
Yeah. And we could be more than one show too, especially if we get a lot of responses. So
yeah, I hope so. Yeah. So Todd writes in, FHB podcast. This is a response to the inquiry from Dan on the podcast on how to best handle flashing new windows in a house with brick cladding. I recently replaced all the windows on my own house that has a brick exterior. Thanks to Mike Slogat's video series and article, I too learned everything I need to know about handling this type of situation. But I think I might have figured out a better method. The first window I did, I followed Mike's recipe and found myself frustrated with the process. The major change that I implemented was after reducing the size of the rough opening and adding window bucks to the same plane as the house exterior's sheathing, I used trim coil as my first step in flashing the window. I cut 5 to 6 inch wide pieces of trim coil approximately 10 inches longer than the width and height of the window area between the brick, and I started in the normal flashing sequence with the bottoms, then sides, and capping off above the window opening. Nailing with roofing nails only around the opening, I found it easier to tuck the trim coil in the air gap behind the brick and integrating it with the house's WRB. I used bevel cedar siding to slope the sill pan, topped it off with zip system stretch tape, followed with 3M flashing tape on the sides and top of the opening. All of my tape wrapping around the trim coil covering the nail heads used to nail on the trim coil. This may not be helpful to Dan considering he doesn't have any type of WRB, but I was really excited at how well this method worked. Love the podcast, and please let me know what you think. I think that sounds fantastic, Todd. Todd, I remember Mike using trim coil as well. I used vinyl trim coil, as I recall, but I might be confounding this with another feature on a similar subject that I worked with. I think it was Bill Robinson, rest his soul. I'm not sure which of those gentlemen used the plaster trim coil, but he did it similarly. What do you guys think?
Good solution. I like the idea of putting on the buck on the inside. It brings the opening down a little bit, so you lose a little glazing space, but it gives you a much easier way to put the window in, attach it, as well as flash it. So, yeah, good way to do it.
This comes from Barbara in Sacktown, which I had to look up as Sacramento. Did you guys know that Sacktown was a shorthand for Sacramento, California? I didn't either. Hey, Patrick, I'm eagerly listening to episode 603's discussion of ways to lift a very heavy ridge beam. I hope Scott writes in with a follow-up email and tells us what he ended up doing. But I was thinking this topic would be a great FHB article. Hope you agree and can put it together. Your friend and faithful audience member, Barbara. Yeah, Barbara, I think that's a great idea. Lifting heavy beams, a handful of ways to do it. Why you'd choose one over the other?
I know over the years, there have been plenty of articles that have been in Fine Homebuilding where lifting a beam up is just part of the article. And then there's often been a sidebar, whether it's a ridge beam or a center beam or putting in a really large header. And, there've been a number of different ways that the authors of those articles have utilized to get the beam up, whether it's a lift or whether it's I remember one where it was two 2x6s side by side. They drilled a bunch of holes in them and then put little rods that went through those holes, and they'd lift it up 6 inches, put the rod in, go to the other end, lift it up 6 inches, put the rod in. And that way they had stabilized those pairs of 2x6s so that they were could lift it right up into position, one person moving from end to end in small increments. So yeah, there's lots of ways to do it, and it'd be nice to see a roundup of that.
Mike, you did, I believe you did one of those articles where you opened up a flat ceiling and made it a cathedral, and I believe that you put you underneath the existing ridge board you installed a ridge beam. Am I remembering that correctly?
I've done so many. Yeah, probably.
You did, Mike. You did.
We'll have to dig it up.
Okay, we'll dig it out. You can tell us more about it next time.
Yeah.
This might sound obvious to you out there who are experienced builders, but one thing I learned about multi-ply beams is they have to be nailed together and fastened very securely, or they don't behave as a multi-ply beam. And my building inspector had to point that out to me. He's like, you need to nail this together, man. It doesn't work the way you think it does. And for those of you out there, if this is obvious, I apologize.
And now with the structural screws that various manufacturers make for screwing together LVLs, it's so much easier than driving the nails, especially when you get an LVL which has a little bit of a cup in the middle, and those screws will draw them together, and they're they'll be size 2 7/8, so it works out perfectly. They don't protrude the other side. So yeah.
As far as lifting beams, I most often see folks use telehandlers now. Brian, wouldn't you agree? When you go out to job sites, there's always one of those, and that's what you do with it, right?
Yeah, it's just, you've said this a number of times, Patrick, in our content meetings when we're talking about framing. Most framing crews nowadays are using that kind of equipment regularly. So it becomes less of a, lifting things becomes less of an issue, like how to. But I think, the people who don't have those are remodelers, who tend to do a lot of remodel framing and need to figure out how to get, and it doesn't always help when you have to get the beam maybe into an existing attic, or, you still sometimes have to figure out how to lift it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if y'all have ways to get heavy things into position as part of your frames, please write in. I think it's a fascinating subject. I can tell you that problem solving related to that kind of stuff was always my favorite part of construction, is getting that stuff done. Larry writes in, hey, Patrick and podcast crew, I've been watching this house in my neighborhood that's undergoing a major renovation. Note the addition on the back. And I've been wondering how it came to be that 3 different house wraps were used. Did the contractor raid the leftover bin at his local supply house? Did he get a 3-for-1 deal on eBay? I can't remember ever seeing such a mishmash before in either new or remodeled construction. Is this even kosher? I thought you and the gang might get a chuckle out of seeing it. Look forward every Friday morning to listening to the podcast on my 6 a.m. walk with my dog. Always informative as well as entertaining. Best, Larry. Thanks, Larry. What do you guys think? What do you think, Jeff?
Well, it just reminds me that there's a house being built in my neighborhood, and watching that go up, and it's like some of the house wrap went up with the walls, and then they went back and filled in some, and I think there's reverse laps, and I don't see any cap staples or anything. It's like, glad I'm not. My house is probably like that too, behind the siding, but
you're glad you don't know.
Yeah.
Well, as sloppy as using different types of house wraps might look, and I only looked at that photo really quickly, but was one of them actually a roofing underlayment?
Let me pop this open here.
I think one of them might have been, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I only looked quickly. But what I was going to say is that installation blunders, like Jeff just pointed out, aside, I can't see the harm in using different brands of house wrap. If you install them, if they're all make sense for that building assembly, and you install them right, I wouldn't see the harm in mixing brands.
Honestly, it looks like they gave some thought to this. The things are lapped correctly. The windows are taped with some logic. Where they're missing a window, they've left a flap that they can integrate it later. This isn't shoddy work. It looks terrible because of the 3 different products.
Yeah.
I've been.
What do you think, Mike?
I've been known to use up roll ends on a job here and there because at the end of a job, you end up with a quarter of a roll or a third of a roll or just some large pieces, and that stuff costs money. Why throw it away? So eventually you got to use all that up. And if you're not one of the brand specific companies where you only use a particular brand, I mean, we'll use a bunch of different brands because they're paid for by the contractor that we'll be framing a house for. So, and the contractor would ordinarily just have us throw the end of the roll in the dumpster. So I just save them, and then some project gets a tapestry of house wrap.
I would point out that quilting is a very proud American tradition of handcraft, and it's beautiful. Honestly, I would much rather my builder use a bunch of different house wraps and do it correctly than some of the garbage I see driving around with, as Brian points out, reverse laps and bad detailing, and it's so common. What do you think the respective manufacturers say when one of these products doesn't hold up?
Well, the only thing that I can think of, I don't know what the manufacturers would say, but there are some differences in installation details from, one manufacturer might recommend taping laps, another manufacturer might not. So there are installation details that they might disagree on, but
those would be very few where they disagree. I went through as part of I don't know what I was up to, but I went through the installation instructions for about 30 different brands of house wrap just to see what the differences were. And most of them have kind of in the last, say, 10 years settled into a common vertical overlap, horizontal overlap, and fastening frequency and the type of fasteners. So it's kind of refreshing to see that they've all settled on those dimensions so that you could mix and match, I guess, without voiding the warranty.
Yeah.
It seems better. It seems like you're more likely to get good installations, too, if you have the same rules. Am I right? Don't you think that teaching folks once is better than a half dozen different ways?
Yeah.
So Kevin writes in, hello all. In a recent segment, Mike spoke about permanent wood foundations and the Southern Pine Council's details. We recently began the excavation for our house, and I'm worried about the impact a concrete foundation might have on our build schedule due to the impending winter weather and my contractor's schedule. I'm interested in the feasibility of a PWF for our build, but need a little clarification that I was not able to find in the IRC or their Southern Pine Guide. 1, there's no detail included on exterior insulation. I assume this is fine when installed on the outside of the poly membrane. 2, the IRC detail showed a maximum backfill of 48 inches. However, I couldn't find the same spec in the Southern Pine Guide. We're planning a full walkout basement and 4 feet of backfill on the high side. I'm wondering if that'll be enough. 3, both the IRC and the Southern Pine alluded to a maximum 8-foot ceiling. Is there no way for a 9-foot ceiling with the last 2 feet of the foundation exposed and not soil bearing? Thanks for the help as always, Kevin. Mike, you seem to be have answers to this.
Yep, I wrote down a whole bunch of answers. So question 1 on the exterior insulation. Yep, just put the poly on or whatever waterproofing you're going to put over the permanent wood foundation, and then you can install the insulation on the outside of that. I plan to do that on my own footing/foundation when I build my house, because I'll be using the PWF. On question 2 regarding the backfill height, now Kevin will have to look closely at the Southern Pine Council document, and if you get to figures 20 and 21 in tables 8, 9, A3, and A4, you'll find details and tables that give you different framing for the basement walls, both stud depth, whether it's a 2x6 or a 2x8, and the frequency of the studs, this on center spacing, whether you got to go 16 on center or 8 on center or 12 on center, based on the height of the backfill. And they give different backfill heights of 48 inches, 60 inches, 72, and 86. So you just have to look at those tables, and that'll give you some guide. There's also another document to check out, and that's the Permanent Wood Foundation Design Specification from the American Wood Council. And they have a lot of additional information and formulas that can help you determine for the height of the backfill what you need to do for the framing. And some of the framing details, when you have taller backfill, are going to include installing joist hangers to connect the stud to the top plate. And the reason for that is because you've got pressure of the backfill pushing the wall inward. And if you just have nails in that top plate to the studs, that's not going to be enough shear value to prevent those studs from tearing right through the top plate. So by putting a joist hanger with the saddle of the hanger on the inside edge or the inboard basement side of the foundation, that will resist the load. So it's kind of a weird place to put a joist hanger because it's in the vertical orientation, but it makes perfect sense when you think about the way the loads or the
think
forces
about a deck on its side, right? If you put a deck running from vertically, it would be the same thing, right?
Yep. And then the maximum height of 8 feet. If you want a taller ceiling, go to that American Wood Council Permanent Wood Foundation specification. I'm pretty sure that there's a formula in Chapter 5, and when you look at the formula, you're going to want to call an engineer, because you'll probably be as confused as I am by all of the inputs to that formula. F sub XBY, divided by, and it just goes on. It's like, if you don't have calculus in your bloodstream, you'll need a little assistance with this. But there is in that American Wood Council guide the formula that you would use as you increase the height of the backfill with a taller wall. There's going to be a way to do it, but again, you may have to go to 2x8s rather than 2x6s, and you may have to drop the stud spacing from 16 to 12 or maybe even to 8 in order to accomplish this. And you may have to go from, say, a number 2 grade lumber to a number 1 grade lumber. We could do a whole webinar just on sorting through these details. If you're not familiar with this stuff and can't find your way through it, then call an engineer. They can probably decipher it in about 45 minutes for you and tell you what you need.
Kevin, I'm going to also suggest, component manufacturers, companies that make trusses for roofs and floors, are often charged with making foundation panels of pressure-treated lumber. They might have someone on there who can at least give you some direction on the right engineer, or they might offer design services too, as component manufacturers often do. I'm guessing it's not uncharted territory what you want to do, so there might be a pretty easy solution. What do you think, Brian?
I know very little about permanent wood foundations. I was glad Mike was here for this one.
Were you considering a permanent wood foundation on your build at any point?
No. I considered a slab foundation, and then when we were when I was two things drove me towards a full basement, which was, one of them was just looking for a little bit of extra space, and have a garage in the site plan, but knew that wouldn't be coming for a few years. So shop space and a little extra living space. And then the other thing was just talking with, local subs, and, so few of them who I was going to be working with had experience, working on slabs. So I didn't feel like I wanted to push them out of their comfort zone. So that was those are the two reasons.
I wonder what your building inspector, as one example, would have said if you told him you wanted to build a permanent wood foundation. Do inspectors, are they at all familiar with this? Do they think it's a wacky idea? I'm curious. You've had both positive and negative experiences with inspectors, or at least your dad did, right, Mike?
Mostly positive.
Yeah.
None have been negative. It just happens to be we've been fortunate with building inspectors in my town that they've been not so much progressive, but they understand that these things are in the code book, and as long as they're in the code book, they may not personally ever use a permanent wood foundation on their own home, but they recognize that it is a viable solution for foundations.
I recently heard of from a friend in Chicago area that they were planning to build a room addition for a client and wanted to use helical piers for minimal site disturbance and, getting out of the ground quickly. And their inspector just simply would not let them do that. He just said, that is no. And I was like, how can someone have so much power? And if they do, why are they even a building inspector? If they're completely resistant to new thinking at all. And this was an engineer-designed project. This wasn't like they were just pulling these things out of thin air.
Yeah, one of the things that's nice about the code is that if you read it as the model code's written, if you have a design professional that uses engineering, generally accepted engineering practices to design something, that the building official should give it the nod, because their responsibility is shifted over for inspections and or accepting alternative systems is shifted over to the design professional. And it really limits you if you don't have that opportunity with so many new products coming out on the market all the time. Would the local inspector say, sorry, no, you can't use Tyvek? I mean, although I have heard some, because it's not listed in the code book. There's so many of the products we use are just manufactured products that aren't technically listed in the code book.
Yeah, and as Glenn Mathewson points out, that there's that term approved in the code, and approved is approved by the local building official. So really, they do have that power to decide whether something is approved for use or not.
Right.
Yeah.
And what troubles me is there's no appeal. I mean, yeah, you can butt heads with the building department, but if you're a professional builder, is that really what you want to do? Do you want to go down there and make enemies and make people look bad in front of their bosses? I don't think you do.
No, I think just the opposite. And I wonder if being a non-professional working with building officials, I've always taken an approach that is really sort of seeking their thoughts on things.
Deferential, right?
Yeah, and going in with lots of questions and, trying to figure out what their, I wrote about this actually in the last issue a little bit, but trying to figure out what their pet peeves are and making sure that, that I take care of those things, and I do find that, people tend to be a little bit more forgiving with other things when you really are willing to take seriously what is important to them. So for example, like braced walls were so important to the building official when I worked on this project, our house, and it was I sat down for a first meeting with him, a design review with him. It was before I even had final plans for the house. And, he really he was concerned with brace walls, wanted to make sure that I understood brace walls and had a plan for the brace walls. And so, I said, I'm going to dive into that when I go home today. And when I come back, I'll have that plan done for you. And, that's what I did. And he was really happy that was done when I saw him again. And I think little things like that set the project going forward really smooth.
Or conversely, if you go in button heads right away, that seems like it's only going to be trouble throughout the rest of the build, right?
Right. So, hey, have you heard of helical piers? What do you think?
Not in my town.
That's not a foundation. This comes from Anna. Hey, podcast team. I have 2 questions. One about the podcast and a longer one about roof support and a DIY rehab project I've taken on. Podcast question. I'm an all-access member and like to download and listen to the members-only after show without having to watch the video on the website. I listen to podcasts while driving and doing physical work and would like to listen to the after show in the same way. I can always go to the website later if the pictures or visuals are needed. Is there a different app that will allow me to download the after show? If not, can you put it on the developer's to-do list? Anna, this is a common complaint, and we are sorry. It's our legacy systems that prevent us from making this easy. I can tell you that a solution, one way or the other, is forthcoming. So we talked about the podcast Tuesday of this week, and that was one of the things that came up. So we're working on it in all sincerity. She goes on to say, I recently bought a 1952 house in rural Tennessee, intended in the next few years to be my retirement home, and also a DIY project. I've always wanted to do a live-in flip, but have loved my 1912 house in Atlanta too much to move. The Tennessee house started as a tiny front room, back room space. The bathroom was probably outside and has been added on to at least 3, maybe 4 times. What is now the kitchen/eating/laundry side of the house was created by enclosing a large exterior porch covered by a shed roof and adding a flat ceiling starting from the lowest level of the porch roof all the way to the 6.5-foot high. The roof looks normal from the outside, but is held up by 2x4s supported by the sloped rafters from the original porch roof. The roof may or not already be saddle-backed over this part, which is about 16 to 20 feet long. I'm guessing saddleback, she means sagging in the middle, right? I've pulled down all the Hobbit height sheetrock. I'm 5'4" and didn't even need a step stool. But I can't go any further until I decide how to support the roof ridge so I can take out all the sloped rafters and put in a higher ceiling. Most everyone I ask, including my architect brother, says the rafter ties will be fine. There are collar ties up by the ridge, but the home inspector, a master framer in an earlier life, insisted that I really need an LVL beam for properly supporting the ridge. Rafter ties I can probably manage myself. I'm an ambitious 61, but I definitely need help hoisting and securing a 20-foot LVL beam, or more likely I'd just hire it out. The current metal roof is about 10 years old on top of asphalt shingles. The decking is 1-inch boards, and the roof and ceiling framing is pre-1974 rough sawn timber that's actually 2 inches by 4 inches or 2 by 6. Good stuff. I intend to save it. Whether the eventual ceiling is vaulted or flat depends on the roof supports. If rafter ties, I envision using them as exposed ceiling joists. If a central beam, then ceiling style to be determined. What do y'all think? Are many rafter ties going to be easier, less expensive, and or as supportive as a single LVL beam? Can you even get 2x4s longer than 16 feet? And would it be safe to join shorter ties with metal plate connectors? Thank you very much, Anna. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, so did you, Patrick, can you, I read that and then I just listened before the show and I just listened to you read it.
And we have
again.
some pictures. Did you see the photo? Yeah, okay.
We have some pictures, but so I think the goal here is a taller ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Obviously fix the structural sagging, but also, to end up with a taller ceiling. So that is, the idea is, the vaulted ceiling would really get her more space. The rafter ties would, if she did what she said, which I think is to frames the ceiling on top of the rafter ties, would give her a little more space, but not much.
So what do you think she should do, Brian?
What's that?
What do you think she should do?
Well, the one thing that I was wondering about is if you're not supporting a load. So let's say there's no floor framed on top of, these rafter ties. Rafter ties in a lot of houses are often ceiling joists, right? And they have to support a ceiling load. But if there's no ceiling load, do you need rafter ties every 16 inches on center? Do you need a certain dimension of rafter ties, or is there different kind of spacing? So I wonder if she could potentially do both things, not so tie the walls together somehow, but also have a vaulted ceiling. So maybe she could do something where she has like some false beams, decorative beams. So she had some more widely spaced rafter ties, and then she wrapped them with some trim so it had the appearance of some beams. That's the thought that came to my mind. Mike's shaking his head, so you must know something about this, Mike.
Well, I agree with your idea there, where the rafter ties wouldn't necessarily need to be every rafter. It might be every third one or fourth one. But how to figure out what that frequency would need to be to support the thrust load, which is the load of the roof, the dead weight of the roof and or snow on top of it, that as you push down on that gable, the ridge style roof, it's going to tend to push the walls out at the bottom. And
Right.
How to resist that force, it's not only the material you use, the lumber, but also the number of fasteners and how you install those fasteners to the top plate or to the opposing rafter. That's the tricky part, is figuring out what you'd need in order to resist that.
And it's tricky, Mike, if I can offer, is because it's in tension. And most things in light wood frame construction are compression loads, right? Everything is stacked on top of each other. But this is relying on those fasteners to resist that spreading you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're alluding to there, Brian, is that now she could insulate and drywall up to the roof rafters, the underside, and then just have those exposed ceiling joists and or call them rafter ties.
Right.
I'm just wondering, looking at the picture and I see what looks like rafters that have a really long planter cut that are resting on top of the 2x4 ceiling joists. And I'm just wondering if there's some weird stuff going on because the house has been reframed or added onto 3 or 4 times, that there is some funky framing that would be hard to resolve simply by putting in rafter ties. In a case like this, and again, without walking it and seeing it, there might be a case to be made for putting in the structural ridge beam, because that resolves all of the loads. You can practically eliminate those old rafters that were overframed on top of or that are resting on the ceiling joists. Eliminate those ceiling joists, or if you want some false beams in there. And the other advantage of putting in a structural ridge is that the way that the old porch was, the ceiling level is 6 feet 5 inches at one end of the room, and the other end of the room is 8 feet. So you're going to end up, even if you keep the rafter ties, you're going to end up with these things clunking tall people in the head when they walk in. And 6'4" is going to be brushing their hair on the underside of those joists, rafter ties or beams. Whereas if it's a ridge beam, then all of that can go away. And it might be more economical by the time you figure it out. As we talked about a little earlier when we were talking about an article about how to lift up a heavy beam inside of a house, I think Anna could use that article right away. because she could utilize that article and see what would work for her to raise it up.
I think you need some engineering here, honestly. Either, a component manufacturer or an engineer to figure out the solution, because Tennessee does get snow loads. And, maybe it's the storm that happens every 10 years that dumps 10 feet of snow, or a foot or two, more realistically, and puts a great weight on this, what looks to be a somewhat flimsy structure to me to begin with.
And when you do put in a structural ridge beam, it's always hard to figure out what you need for the load path. You can't just plug one in and count down the walls beneath it to support it. You may need to add extra studs underneath that. And there might be some bearing points somewhere else within the building rather than just at the gable ends, which could reduce the overall length of a particular beam section that you would have to lift up. You imagine if the whole building's 20 feet long, yeah, lifting up a 20-foot LVL would be tricky. But if there's a bearing point at 8 feet and another one at 6 feet beyond that, where you could get a post through the middle of the building where there might be a wall, then you're dealing with smaller pieces of wood that make up that overall ridge beam. So, yeah, having somebody with a little bit of more knowledge on the engineering side of it take a look at it, and they might be able to solve the problem in a bunch of different ways.
I'm going to say two things before we get to the next question. Tension rods with steel can be way less intrusive than collar ties or rafter ties, as we describe them in wood. The other thing is, like, I'm looking at this image described, sealing an attic structure. That's a jumble of stuff. Honestly, sometimes it's easier to just cut everything out and buy scissor trusses from a component manufacturer and get on with your life and have, nice new framing to work with. There's electrical running through the ceiling rafter space, but it's done shoddy too, so, I don't think there's a lot to save here.
That's true. And she could still do a lot of the demo. She could, hire a framer to get a new roof on, essentially get a new roof on the house the way she wants it. And then she can take over again. And
yeah. Honestly, I think it would be so much less work.
It's a simple house, right? So it's going to get done fast. It's not a complex. It might be complex because of the work that was done to it over the years, but it's pretty straightforward shape.
Well, you say that, but then, you don't know what the conditions of the walls are. And once you pull the roof off, you might start going a little further, say, let's tear the whole thing down. So, you gotta figure out what's going to be the most cost effective and how much work you want to put into something versus just cover it up and leave it the way it is. I don't know. It's a tough one.
It is. Yeah. Anna, I hope you'll tell us what you do and keep us posted on your progress, because I think it's an awesome project. And it delights me that this is what you want to do with your retirement. Right?
He has the advantage a lot of us don't, which is a brother, I think, that's an architect.
An architect, yeah.
Yeah, so if your brother hasn't actually been out to the house and he's only just looked at pictures, you might pay his plane fare to come out and spend a weekend out there and really look it through top to bottom and give you
buy him a one-way ticket, and then you can get him to help build the house.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion, Mike. I'm with you there. Yeah. This comes from Marc. Hey, podcast team. I continue to thoroughly enjoy this show, and thank you for all the time and work that goes into it. I remember back in the day, the team said how undesirable it was to use floor joists as part of the return air ductwork in the HVAC system of a house. For homes that are already ducted that way, would aero barrier be a possible solution for leaving the ductwork as built and rehabbing the problem? So Aeroseal was really what you want, Marc, and I don't know much about it, so I reached out to a friend, Ross McPherson, who did a Fine Homebuilding article on aero barrier, the air sealing product. But before that was Aeroseal, which is the parent company, which was designed to seal ductwork. And Ross wrote back right away, great question. Aeroseal is a sister product to Aero Barrier, which is specifically designed for HVAC ductwork. Aeroseal would be the best product for this application. Every day we seal systems with building cavities as part of the ductwork. For the best results, we recommend that the ductwork is cleaned prior to sealing. Typically, the duct cleaning and Aeroseal installation can be done in the same day. The Aeroseal will not coat all the building cavity materials. Rather, it will seal the gaps between those materials and significantly reduce the leakage from this distribution system. Reducing the leakage will lower the utility cost to operate the system and typically improves comfort in the home as the heated/cooled air gets to its intended destination as designed. There you go. That's an answer. So, yes. Isn't that great when we have a yes or no answer?
Because we would muddle our way through it.
Oh yeah, and not give any answer.
Right to the source.
Yeah, we tell them all our questions about their question.
Yeah.
I would love to have Ross on a Fine Homebuilding podcast to talk about this technology. People think I'm a shill for aero barrier, but I'm not. I just think it's amazing technology that has the potential to make our homes a lot more tight for a lot less effort. And I don't know anyone who finds, it exciting to tape miles of insulation seams or fill acres of. You do. You like that?
I love taping and feeling. Yeah. I don't know. It just relax and just roll the tape.
Patrick, I think I mentioned on the show a few weeks back that I had recently been on a couple of energy audits, and the energy auditing company that I was with, I asked them about duct blaster testing ducts for leakage, and because she did neither of the jobs that we were on did she do it, and they both had duct systems, and her response was I found really interesting. She said that usually a quick visual inspection will tell them whether the ducts need to be sealed, and so they no reason to take out the duct blaster to check the ducts, because they're going to bring in the Aeroseal people who are going to, just like using aero barrier, they're monitoring the leakage rates at the same time that they're doing the sealing. So they do a quick visual inspection of the ducts, and unless they really can't tell, they just typically they say, well, these ducts are either well sealed or they're not, and if they're not, they bring in, or they recommend that the client bring in the local Aeroseal people right away and get that done.
It makes so much sense to me. I mean, it's a process that takes hours instead of tens of hours, right?
Yeah,
Marc,
I'm not sure about aero barrier as an air barrier so much, and I guess it's going to be a very useful thing to have for remodels in existing homes. During maybe when Mike's dubious, I can see the look on his face, but I'm thinking during transitions when people are remodeling or new people are moving in and the house is empty, and you have that opportunity. But for new homes, I'd be curious if it catches on as an air sealing method for new buildings.
I think it's catching on. I know the Eulers use it because they don't want to spend the time, with miles of tape and cans of spray foam. So it's a viable method.
But I question that. Is it really miles of tape and cans of spray foam on a new home? When you're, there's a few things you need to do along the way, but it's not. You're just sort of like you're air sealing your mud sills when you get started, and then you're taping your sheathing as you frame. And, if you have a tricky home, you may need to come up with some transitions, but it doesn't seem all that complex to me.
It's days of work, I'm sure. Just imagine how long it takes to seal the sheathing layer to the foundation, as an example, with some liquid flashing or however you do that. I don't who the heck wants to do that? I'm with Tim. It's messy.
Me and Mike
I became a carpenter to work with wood, not goop. This is Marc's. He says, now for the provocation. I received a news blast from Builder Online, and the article link below left me speechless. Pitching concrete as a more environmentally responsive building material than wood boggles my mind. Would love to hear the team's thoughts on the article and the potential knock-on its effects from broadcasting this type of misinformation to the industry. Last time I checked, trees regenerate and grow new trees. I've never found any concrete seeds being shed by my foundation, nor any concrete lings putting forth their tender shoots on the way to becoming a bag of ready mix. All the best, Marc. That's hilarious. Did you guys read this?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, did you notice did you look at the byline? So I almost didn't get past the byline, but I did read it. I mean, this article is written by a concrete industry group that has created a website to promote the sustainable benefits of concrete. So I don't even really need to get into the carbon impacts of concrete versus wood. And the truth is that is a complicated thing to get into, and I'm certainly no expert on it. But when you see something written by a trade organization promoting, their constituents, obviously it's not going to be balanced,
unbiased.
It doesn't mean that it's necessarily all BS, but it's certainly not going to be. You can't expect it to be unbiased information.
So something that came to mind when I read it right away was that the Concrete Association. So there's two layers of the association. One is build with strength, and then the other is which is a coalition of the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. Mm-hmm. That's probably what you discovered, Brian, when you were looking. They must be afraid of wood because they must either foresee or currently experiencing a decrease in their market share. And I'd like to know what those numbers are that they're seeing that makes them want to put their foot forward in showing or demonstrating that concrete is sustainable in their minds. So, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of buzz about the carbon costs of concrete production. And as I understand it, if it were a country, it would be like the 5th biggest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. So, that's no small amount.
It's not, but, is it going to, do those negative impressions that are given to people about concrete going to reduce the amount of concrete and then that be taken up by wood? Are they going to lose market share? I wonder.
Well, Mike, if you keep talking about permanent wood foundations,
right.
You're that they're after.
I get, I think 4 or 5 email newsletters every week, and I've been noticing the last few years that many of the first or second article that is in those e-newsletters is something written by some association or some group or some company that wants to promote their product, system, whatever. And I can only imagine that these magazines that are putting out these e-newsletters are getting money for pushing those out. So,
or at the minimum, there's just fewer journalists, and they'll take whatever news story they can put in there because there's no one else to write real news, right?
So I guess I could start writing real news about building and give it away for free, and it'll get published everywhere.
I'm guessing you'd have a pretty good shot at it if I could offer, So today's after show, we're going to talk about holiday gift giving. And I got to tell you, I already started shopping for myself for the holidays. So I'll tell you what I bought, and I hope to hear what you all want to get or give for holiday gift giving. My guess is going to be tools or building materials in our context. So I'm always very excited for this time of year because it's an excuse to buy stuff that I want for myself.
Are you expecting listeners to send us presents, Patrick? Is that what this is all about?
Yes.
And Patrick's address is...
Well, if you are an all-access member, thank you very much for helping continue the important work of Fine Homebuilding. And if you're not, I hope you'll consider it because there is tons of good stuff on there for your projects and your clients' needs. So check it out. There is 40 years of amazing stuff we have produced, and I am proud every day to say that we still do a good job. So thanks for your support. You guys have any final thoughts before we head to the after show?
Nope.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Brian, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us. However you're listening, it helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building, and thank you very much for listening.